recently an article has crossed my Facebook feed twice. Once because a friend of mine had posted it and he kind of praised it, thought it was a good thing. And the second was it was posted in a Facebook group I'm a part of, and the person was just asking for thoughts from the members of the group. And I participated in the comments section. I took the bait, and oh my goodness, like it was so many different opinions, so many different takes, and so many different. It was just very frustrating. And well, the article's so short. I'm going to go ahead and just read it, and then we're going to delve into it because it touches on so many things. People were putting things into the discussion that really shouldn't have been there, but it's because of the failure of Christendom. Like institutional Christianity has failed on this topic, and so there's a lot of confusion. So I'm going to hopefully be a help in clarifying the problems here. I really hope that I can do that. I'm hoping that I will at least, if you listen to my thoughts on this, you'll come away going, that makes more sense. That actually makes more sense. That's my hope. So we'll see. Okay, so the article starts out, well, first off, it's got a picture in black and white, and it's got, on one side of the picture, it's got, I don't know, like a woman's lingerie gown. It's kind of see-through, and it's hanging on a hanger, and it's got some like jewelry and stuff, some some like a pearl necklace and stuff, hanging on it. And above that with text it says, "This is what the Bible calls immodesty." And then on the other side of the picture, it's got a bikini, hanging from a hanger, and it says, "It never mentions this." So it's obviously provocative. And then this is what the article itself says, or the comment, let's say. It's not really an article. It says, "For those who were taught that modesty," and it has that in quotes, "modesty means covering skin, this might feel uncomfortable." And then it continues, "But in the two passages people quote most about modesty, 1 Timothy 2 and 1 Peter 3, the concern is not bodies. It's status, it's wealth. It's using appearance to signal power, superiority, or moral rank. The Bible critiques dressing in ways that elevate yourself over others, not wearing a swimsuit at the beach. A bikini was never the problem. Flashy displays of status always were. When we get this wrong, the damage isn't theoretical. Purity and modesty culture trained us to police bodies, especially women's bodies. It taught people to associate righteousness with appearance, temptation with skin, and shame with being seen. It shifted responsibility for desire away from those with power and placed it on those with less. That distortion has left many people disconnected from their bodies, suspicious of their desires, and carrying spiritual shame Jesus never handed out. Read the text again, this time without purity culture glasses on. Modesty in the Bible is about who you're centering, not what you're covering." Now, I say it's a mixed bag because the guy makes some decent points. Some of the stuff he says is correct, but some of it's not correct. Some people in the comments of the Facebook group I'm a part of were making the claim. They're saying this guy's creating a false dichotomy. Absolutely correct. He makes the false dichotomy in where he says, a bikini was never the problem, flashy displays of status always were. At least as far as I can tell from what this dude is saying, he's basically saying there's nothing wrong with bikinis, it's just, showing off your status. That's what's bad. It's like, well, two things could be bad at the same time for different reasons. But the problem is, he is right. This purity culture and policing women's bodies and stuff, like, there's a lot of that that's true. I've witnessed it. I've been in groups that are like that. I grew up as a military brat, so we moved around. We were in different church groups, and they had different ways of thinking and going about things. And so, and then the way people defined modesty and things like that. There's, again, as I've mentioned in a different podcast, there's a lot of terms, a lot of biblical terminology that has been redefined by institutionalized churchy Christianity, quote unquote. Even that term has been redefined. And it causes problems. I think it's good if we can actually define terms correctly. And there are even people in the comments section that I was disagreeing with for a variety of different reasons, and I still thought that some of the points they were making were like dead on correct. So let's go ahead. I'm not really gonna go through the entire article. I'm just reading it just so you can hear what it is. But there are two passages the guy references, and we are going to look at those. One was 1 Timothy 2. So this is Paul writing to Timothy, and he's addressing a ton of different things in this letter. And this is a very controversial passage because he's talking about a bunch of other stuff even after the part that we're going to talk about. And it talks about women being silent in the church, in the gathering of believers, and having to, there's tons of controversy there. But the part we're going to talk about is let's see, 1 Timothy chapter 2, verse 9. So he says, "Likewise, I want women to adorn themselves with proper clothing, with modesty," or you could just say modestly, "and discreetly, not with braided hair and gold or pearls or costly garments." Okay, now right there, this is what, if we just look at what Paul is saying and try and figure out the context of what, look at the words he's using in the context that he's using them, and then just go from there. So he's saying he wants women to adorn themselves, to clothe themselves, to put upon themselves proper clothing. Okay, well, what is that a reference to? Well, they need to be with modesty and discreetly. Okay, just to be discreet is to not draw attention to yourself. So modestly and discreetly. But then he goes on to say, he's kind of defining what those are. Not with braided hair and gold or pearls or costly garments. Okay, now before we start going, okay, therefore, we can never, if you braid your hair, you're violating what he's saying. If we continue reading, he says, "But rather by means of good works, as is proper for women making a claim to godliness." Okay, just those two verses. Before we delve into this anymore, I want you to notice just a general thing. He's talking about clothing yourself with something, adorning yourself with something. And the first part is he says, I don't want women to adorn themselves with, or I want women to adorn themselves with proper clothing, which is modest and discreet. So I want them to do that. I don't want them to do it with braided hair and gold or pearls or costly garments. Instead, I want them to adorn themselves, he's continuing, instead, by means of good works. It's like, wait a minute, how do you, good works? You can't, you can't put good works in my hand and say, put this on. Okay, good works is not a shirt. Good works is not a necklace. Good works is something I do. It's an action. But he's saying it's something I can put on, as is proper for women making a claim to godliness. So in other words, doing good works, if I'm doing something that's good, that's righteous, that is a clothing I'm putting on. It's like, okay, so Paul's talking about something deeper than just physical clothes or things that I can wear around my neck or put, braiding my hair. He's talking about something that's deeper, something that's spiritual, something that's not physical. At least he's, I shouldn't say he's at least going in that direction. It can't just be some, what we would call legalistic set of rules of don't do this. That seems obvious just of the way he's juxtaposing these two verses. There's a certain way that he wants women to adorn themselves, which includes adorning themselves with good works, which is like, well, gee, it's not like I wake up in the morning and put on my good works. I put on my work clothes or whatever. So already I'm like, okay, he's dealing with, as many people in the comments section of this Facebook group said, he's addressing a heart issue. You could even potentially, because this is a way that a lot of the biblical literature works. This would be kind of the idioms, like um, Jesus makes statements like he says, "Do not work for the food that perishes, but work for the food which endures until like eternally." Um, he's not saying you can't work for food. That's part of what you're supposed to do is you work a job to get food, to get money for food. You have to eat. There's other passages that say if a man does not work, he shall not eat. So what Jesus is saying, this structure, the language, the way it would be understood, would be, don't merely work for the food that perishes. In other words, work for something beyond just food that perishes. Um, Work for food that doesn't perish. Do something beyond just this. I think that's kind of the same idea here. I'm not a Greek scholar or anything like that, but when Paul says, "Likewise, I want women to adorn themselves with proper clothing, modestly and discreetly, not with braided hair and gold or pearls or costly garments," maybe he could even be saying, like, not merely with this. Now that I say that out loud, that might not be the case. I'm just I'm hesitant to say, because I don't think this is what Paul is saying. I don't think Paul is saying that braided hair is innately evil, or that gold or pearls or costly garments are evil. Because if you said that, then basically you're saying that there's no grounds whatsoever to wear a costly garment. And then, okay, well, what's a costly garment? So then we got all of like the legalistic people. Well, a costly garment means it has to, if you have to pay the, you end up with a bunch of stupid standards that aren't even there. It's like, well, how do you determine costly garments? Well, that's depends on the cost of other things. So it's comparison and stuff. And what about all of like the kings and their royal attire? And what about in the Old Testament when there's tons of people wearing, like, am I not allowed to wear a ring? No, okay, no more wedding rings. No more. You can't wear a necklace. Well, no, that's too costly. That doesn't make sense. That doesn't work with the entirety of Scripture. Okay, you can wear jewelry, you can braid your hair. If you delve into a little bit more of like the cultural background of the people that he's talking to, this is all has to do with your status, flaunting your status. It's a vanity problem. I'm trying to draw attention to me. Again, I point back to the term discreetly. He's addressing the women. I don't think that's an accident either. I think women tend to be tempted more towards drawing attention to themselves, to their physical selves. They tend to want to do that a little bit more than men do. Now, men do as well, but it is interesting that Paul is specifically addressing the women. Now, you could say, well, this is just the women in this context. Okay, fair enough. It's not women all over the place, but it's funny that this principle kind of applies to a lot of, look at American culture. Again, I think these principles can apply to both men and women, but in the context here, Paul is talking about women, and he's saying, I want women to adorn themselves with proper clothing that's modest and discreet, and not with showy off type clothing. Okay, I'm making up words here. Stuff that shows off, that flaunts your status, flaunts, I'm this, I'm that. Now, the question is, why would you wear clothes like that to show off? Like, what's the, well, obviously you're motivated by something. You didn't accidentally wear those clothes. You're doing this with a motivation behind it. And that's the problem. The problem is you shouldn't have that. That's why he then goes to, no. You need to be clothing yourselves with good works, doing righteousness, doing good, not doing whatever this is. Do that. That's what's proper for women making a claim to godliness. If you want to claim that you're a godly person, you're not sitting there trying to come up with ways of dressing yourself to make people look at you and go, wow, that person's like so much better and higher than I am. Jesus addressed this with the Pharisees and with the religious leaders that love to wear their clothing, which they were supposed to wear, priestly garments and things, or whatever the clothing was that he's addressing. And he's saying, you like to make these, excessive, to draw attention to yourself, to show your status. And that's not good. You shouldn't be doing that. You love getting praise from other people. Okay, so in other words, that seems blatantly obvious to me. Maybe it's not obvious to everyone, but that seems to be, just looking at the context of those two verses, that's what Paul's saying there. Okay, let's check over with 1 Peter chapter 3. And in this case, Peter is addressing wives. And he says, let's see here. Well, I'll start from the beginning. It says, in the same way, you wives, be submissive to your own husbands, so that even if any of them are disobedient to the word, meaning to the word of God, they may be won without a word by the behavior of their wives, as they observe your chaste and respectful behavior. So we're kind of jumping right in the middle of his letter. But he's essentially telling Christian women, saying like, hey, be submissive to your husbands, even the ones that aren't really following God. They're not following the word of God. Because if you are submitting to them and being respectful to them, then they may, that alone, those good deeds, those good works that Paul kind of references, those are going to stick out. Those are the things that you should be flaunting in some sense. Those are the things that you can't hide. That spirit, that quiet, humble, but humility, the spirit of humility, that's going to shine through. So then we get to verse 3. Your adornment must not be, and it's got italics for this next word. It's italicized in this version, which means it's not, this word is not a Greek word. This would just be the implied understanding. But your adornment must not be merely external, braiding the hair and wearing gold jewelry or putting on dresses, but let it be the hidden person of the heart. So again, Peter's using the same kind of idea. Your adornment, the thing that you're wearing, must not be merely, or you could just take the merely out and say, must not be external. Obviously, you have to wear clothes. Clothes, by definition, are something external. So I think that's why merely makes sense. Your adornment must not be merely external, braiding the hair and wearing gold jewelry or putting on dresses, but let it be the hidden person of the heart, with the imperishable quality of a gentle and quiet spirit, which is precious in the sight of God. For in this way, in former times, the holy women also, who hoped in God, used to adorn themselves. There's that term, adorn, to clothe, to put on. How do you put on a gentle and quiet spirit? It's not clothing in the same sense that like my shirt that I'm wearing and this hat that I have on, for those of you who are watching the video. These are physical clothing, but a spirit of humility is not clothing in the same sense that a hat is clothing. Okay, I hope that's obvious. But yet, Peter is connecting these two. So he says, for in this way, former times the holy women also who hoped in God used to adorn themselves, being submissive to their own husbands, just as Sarah obeyed Abraham, calling him Lord, your master. And you have become her children if you do what is right, without being frightened by any fear. So we've got this idea of adorning oneself with something that's not physical, as opposed to something that is merely physical, external. And in one case, Paul seems to be addressing this like flaunting of status, but then the other one, it's not really necessarily flaunting of status. It's talking about wives with regard to their husband. And those, again, those passages, as the article that, or again, it wasn't really an article, but the post that's been being passed around is saying like, look, this isn't about, like, how would I put it? I agree with the original post that this Paul and Peter are not really addressing sexually provocative clothing. I don't think that's what they're thinking. I was like, hey, don't be dressing in such a way that's sexually arousing to men. Okay, I don't think that's on their radar. I think they're talking about like, look, stop dressing in such a way to draw attention to yourself in with the intention of trying to show that you're better than other people, you're higher status, you're richer than other people, flaunting your wealth. Don't do that, because people do that. Okay, there's lots of ways to flaunt your wealth, and it's a heart issue. It's like, why are you doing that? Why are you doing that? Well, it's not because you have a motivation for godliness. So women in this context and culture at this time don't do that. And then Paul specifically points out ways that they do that. Okay, now you could go to a culture nowadays where people aren't flaunting their wealth, women aren't flaunting their status by wearing this kind of jewelry or braiding their hair. Maybe they do something different. I think if Paul was writing a letter to that culture at that time, nowadays or whatever, he would pick on different things. He'd say, look, don't be doing this. Again, go back to the heart issue. Your motivation's off. The motivation that you have is bad, and this is the way it's manifesting itself in the physical world. You're doing these things. So don't do those things. Because when people see those things, they understand, oh, you're rich. Oh, you're saying you're better than us. Like, that's because that's what everybody does in the culture. So, okay, so I could just end the podcast right here. That's my position. I think that's very clear from the passages if you just look at them and read them. But the problem is, we end up with the whole like bikini thing that he throws in, and that's because Christendom has thrown in all of that. We've redefined modesty to basically mean not be sexually arousing. Now, you can't see this if you're just listening to the audio, but I'm rubbing my eyes because I'm like, I've thought about making podcasts on this topic, and I've always just kind of talked myself out of it because it was just too complicated. I was like, it's going to take forever. So I'm going to try and keep this short because I really don't want to make a long podcast out of this one. I want this to be kind of quick. But yes, I agree in principle that modesty, that term, typically, off the top of my head, when you come across it in these passages in the Bible, it's not really talking too much about, it's not dealing with the problem of being sexually arousing when you shouldn't be, if you want to put it that way. Now, does that mean it's okay for let's harp on women for right now, okay? Because that's typically where it goes. Is it wrong? And this, I'm asking this as an open-ended question. Is it wrong for women? Let's say they're single women. They're not married. They want to be married. Maybe they're trying to attract a man. Is it okay for them to dress like with the deliberate purpose to dress in such a way as to be as sexually arousing as possible to any potential men that might find them attractive? And can they do that to lure a man, to seduce a man, to attract a man, can they? That's a good question. I think most people, their knee-jerk response would be, no, they can't do that. That's wrong. That's being promiscuous, or that's not being. They probably say it's not being modest. Now, here's the struggle I have. I think you could legitimately say you're not being modest, but it would be for different reasons than what Paul is saying here, or Peter is saying here in these two passages. Let me put it this way. If a woman is dressing in such a way as to deliberately arouse the men that see her, arouse them sexually, then what she's doing is she's trying to get attention. She's trying to garner attention. Okay? That's what she's doing. If she's dressing, I'm talking about the woman who's specifically doing this. Okay, this shouldn't be hard. Like, Go to Instagram. Go to Instagram and look up Instagram models, bikini models, whatever. They're trying to get attention. Why? Well, they have a lot of reasons. One could just be because if I put a picture of myself in a sexually provocative pose in a bikini, and I get more clicks on that, and then that's monetary incentive, revenue. Okay, my job is posting stuff on Instagram and trying to get enough clicks on it, and then I can run ads, and then there's a monetary incentive. Um, that and they know if I do this, men like this. Why not? Okay, would that be something that Paul or Peter would argue and say, hey, if you're a godly woman, a woman pursuing godliness, don't do that. And if that's the argument they would make, what grounds would they use? Would they say you're being immodest? Would that be the term they use? I mean, you're definitely not being discreet. You're drawing attention to yourself, but it would be for a different motivation than what's being talked about in these passages, at least definitely in the 1 Timothy 2. Because 1 Timothy 2 seems to be dealing with status symbols. Okay, women dressed in a bikini trying to get guys to be sexually aroused by them is not the same thing as trying to show off status. That's a completely different motivation. But just because it's a different motivation doesn't mean it's not a bad motivation. And it could be the case that modesty might be a big enough term to be the umbrella for both. In other words, if I say be modest, it definitely means don't draw attention to yourself with the motivation of showing off your status. But maybe it could also mean, and I'm just saying it could, I'm not saying it does. I'm just saying it could also include don't draw attention to yourself by means of being sexually provocative. That might be a given in Paul's mind, but the reason he's not addressing that is because that wasn't the problem. That wasn't a problem. In the culture he's speaking to, and that's not what Peter was addressing specifically when he was talking about women with their wives with their husbands. So, in other words, the whole question of what level or to what degree can men and women, or women and men, that'd be the better way to put it here, dress in a way that provokes the sex drive of the opposite gender. Is it okay for women to dress in a way that turns guys on? And it's difficult because if you said yes, I think it's okay, then it's like, okay, well, what about a married woman? Can a married woman do that for other men? Like, what would be the purpose of doing that? If you're a married woman dressing in a way that's sexually provocative to men, what are you doing? Why are you trying to make other men sexually aroused by your clothing or lack thereof? What are you doing? Because I've thought about this before, and I don't have a well, this is the line. The dress has to be like this, and you can't. I don't have an answer like that, because I've thought, I'm like, well, okay, what about a woman who's trying to find a guy? Like, is it bad for her to kind of show off a little bit of herself, and try and attract a mate? Like, if the answer is yes. And let's just make it simple. Let's take the extreme. Let's say it's completely fine. There's nothing wrong whatsoever with an unmarried woman trying to attract a mate, trying to attract a husband, and so she does anything and everything she can to show off her physical form in ways that will seduce, or, I mean, seduce is already kind of a bad term, but to sexually arouse men. I say I'm kind of giving myself away here, because I do think that there's a difference between, like, in a marriage covenant with a man and a woman, husband and a wife. There's nothing wrong with a wife doing things to arouse her husband sexually. There's nothing wrong with that, because that's within a covenant. This goes back to some things I need to address in future podcasts. Biblically, when a husband takes a woman as his wife, she's his property. He owns her. Okay? Part of the reason why he wants to own her is because he wants to own the children that come from her womb. So, how do you get those babies? Sex. How do you have sex? Well, you've got to be sexually aroused if you're going to have sex. So, it's a good thing if the wife is able to sexually arouse her husband, because that fits with the purpose of the marriage and having godly offspring. Be fruitful and multiply. It's the first mandate, the first command God gave to Adam and Eve was be fruitful and multiply. So that all makes sense within a marriage covenant. And the woman can only be owned by one man at a time. So in other words, if she's trying to sexually arouse her husband in order for them to have sex so that they can have children potentially, that all makes perfect sense. Now, I'm not saying that's the only purpose. Let me just add a little side note. That's not the only purpose of sex. Okay, sex has a lot of purposes, but that's the core purpose. That's the primary function of sex. But it has a bunch of other functions. It has at least a secondary function of bonding the man and the woman together, which is a good thing. And so, that's another purpose of the woman being able to sexually arouse her husband. It's going to help facilitate more bonding. And vice versa. It's good if a husband is able to sexually arouse his wife. That's good. Okay, but when you start saying that this wife can do anything, doesn't matter what the thing is, I don't really care. I don't care. I'm not trying to draw lines of what clothing or whatever. Do anything, wear anything, with the specific intention, the deliberate motivation of sexually arousing other men. I immediately go, there's something wrong with that. You already have a husband. You can only have one. If you're trying to sexually arouse other men, you're kind of like setting yourself up as an adulteress, a forbidden woman. And the scriptures are very clear that adultery is sinful. And being an adulteress, having the heart of an adulteress, is not good. So if you're an adulteress, this is the kind of things you would be doing, because you're living in a perpetual state of adultery. You have the heart of an adulteress. You're seeking to sexually arouse other men and garner their attention so that they desire you and want to have sex with you. Okay, that's not good. So I think we can draw a line there and say, if a married woman is trying to act in a way that is sexually provocative to men, or dress in a way that is sexually provocative to men, if that's her intention, there's something wrong with her heart. She has the heart of an adulteress, and that's not good. So we need to deal with the heart issue. Just telling her, merely telling her you can't wear these certain things and you can't do these certain things is not going to solve the problem. It's going to be a failed attempt at behavior modification without a heart change. It's never going to solve the problem. But I'm not saying you shouldn't at least put that in place. But that wouldn't even, again, I can think of tons of things off the top of my head that a woman could do that is done, that would be, on the surface, you would say there's nothing wrong with that. But she could do it in such a way that it is. Let me just use a simple one. Let's say she looks across the room at a guy, smiles, and winks at him, and then licks her lips. Okay, how do How do we stop that behavior? Oh, that's terrible. That's terrible. Yes, in the context, what she's doing is she's trying to seduce another man. Like, it's clear. I'm stacking the cards in my favor here. She's clearly trying to seduce another man, and she's a married woman. That's not good. But what are we going to do? Are we going to ban? Well, you can't wink. You can't wink your eye at another person. You can't lick your lips, and have a guy see you lick your lips. And you can't smile. Like, you see how stupid that is? That's not going to solve the problem. Okay, the problem is her heart. She's going to find some way. I mean, when you think back, like, people make jokes about, like, the Amish, or, in the days of, like, Little House on the Prairie, it's like, you show your ankles, and that's considered, not ladylike. It's improper. It's immodest, because if you show your ankle, it's like, and again, there are meanings associated with actions, and there's meanings associated with any number of things, and some of these are culturally defined and culturally understood. I'll put it this way: if I lived in a culture where every woman wore dresses and they never showed their ankles, and if the cultural norm, like it or not, whether I agree with it or not, if the cultural norm was don't show your ankles, because if you do that, you're essentially, you are communicating that you want sex with that person. If that was the understood meaning of that, which, again, I don't even think that's absurd, because there's this idea, this idiom in the Bible about uncovering someone's feet. Uncovering their feet is kind of like a proposition for intercourse to some degree, from what I understand. Correct me if I'm wrong. Feel free to comment and correct me if I'm wrong. But I believe that that's an idiom that kind of has a reference toward, it's like hey, you see that with Ruth, where she's told to go and she uncovers Boaz's feet, which is kind of like hey, I'm putting myself out there. I'm asking you for sex, and not just sex. I'm asking. She's a full proposal, basically saying, please take me as your wife. Cover me with your garment. I'm uncovered as a woman. I don't have a covering. I don't have a husband. I want you as my husband. And so she's doing all of, like, the social things that are social cues that kind of show, like, hey, I'm asking you. And I don't think it was, in the context of the story, it wasn't deemed inappropriate what she was doing. She was doing the proper procedures, but she was being very blatantly obvious. She wasn't sitting across the room at a bar, just kind of, raising her eyebrows at a guy and going like, why isn't he coming over? Like, she went up basically and said, hey, Boaz, I'm interested in you. Please take me as your wife. That's essentially what was going on. So anyway, so let's say you have a culture that's inspired by this idiom from, the Israelite culture and the Hebrew literature about uncovering someone's feet, and that being kind of like having a sexual idea. And so you go, you know what? We have this cultural norm of not showing our ankles, because that's kind of part of your foot, and that's a little bit too much of your feet to show, and that kind of is your. We're gonna say if you show your ankles, that's an invitation, and we don't want to do that. So it's immodest. It's not being discreet. Again, maybe you shouldn't associate those terms with it, but the point is, they say cultural norm is we're not going to do this. If I lived in that culture and I understood that, and I never really questioned it, I just understood that, and a girl that I liked, let's just set this up like this, girl that I liked, I was interested in, and she's interested in me, and she looks over at me, looks both ways, makes sure nobody's looking, and then reaches down and lifts up the edge of her skirt just above her ankle, kind of smiles at me, and then drops her skirt back down. Okay, that could very easily be sexually arousing to me in a context like that. Because now I've got a woman that I'm interested in, that I already find attractive. And what she has just done, it's not so much that she lifted her dress up and showed me her ankle. It's the meaning behind it. She basically said, I want you. I want to have sex with you. I want you to be my husband. I want to have your babies. Well, man, I'm already interested in you. I'm really aroused right now. Boom. Okay. And so all of that's packaged in just one little thing, showing me her ankles. Okay? It's not that her ankles are innately just sexually arousing. It's the symbolism behind it. Okay? Like this, I don't know. I see things, I see, I don't know. I see the world differently, I guess, than a lot of people do. I try and look for the deeper symbolism and the meanings, and my pursuit in that direction throughout my life has led me down some, dangerous paths, because you can end up with going down like a path of Gnosticism, where you're seeing hidden meanings in things, and it ends up your conspiracy theories. And there's that route. I've tried to steer clear of that kind of stuff, but discernment, being able to discern those things and having an understanding of the culture that you're operating in and the meanings associated with things. Like, if I show you the middle finger, everybody knows what that means in American culture and in other cultures too, but we understand what that means. Okay, there's nothing innately, intrinsically evil about my middle finger. Okay, God made my hand. He made all 5 fingers. But for some reason, if I just show you just one of them, it has a different meaning. Go figure. Somebody at some point associated a meaning with it, and the rest of the culture went along with it. And so, if Paul was addressing America, American culture, American Christians, and he was saying, hey guys, look, it's not appropriate to show just your middle finger. Don't flip the bird. Don't do that. Maybe he could say something like that, and we would understand it. We would innately understand, yeah, it's not right to do that. You don't tell somebody, F off or whatever, like, in that way. That's not appropriate. We would understand what he's talking about, but maybe thousands of years from now, when that's completely done away with, and it's different language, different culture, and they're like, what's wrong with your? There's something wrong about the middle finger. There's something like they might get confused. So going back to like the being sexually provocative. I've said this, I think, in other podcasts, or maybe I'll say it in future ones. But there came a point when I suddenly realized, it dawned on me, that all of the physical characteristics of the female body, the female form, that are stereotypically deemed attractive or sexually appealing by the average man in any culture around the world. Like, in other words, this isn't just a culturally, like I was just describing, like where, I see your ankle, and I'm, that'd be more of a cultural thing. But we're like just on a primal biological, it's hardwired into the male, into men, into the male sexuality, the male sex drive. We find this attractive. Boobs, your woman's breasts, a woman's like an hourglass figure, woman's butt, long hair. There's others, but let's just take breasts. Like, why do guys find breasts attractive? It just dawned on me. It was like, oh, wait a minute. All these things I was just thinking of, these are all fertility symbols. They're all signals. They're all things that signal to my male mind that this woman is probably fertile. It's like, well, that's a good thing. That's a good thing if God wants men to be attracted to. If God wants offspring, be fruitful and multiply, it would make sense, especially since He created the human body, to put biological markers in the human form that are attractive to men, and to have those things that are attractive to be specifically fertility markers. Okay, if a woman has nice hair, that's like just a general sign of health, from what I understand. A woman's breasts, hey, the baby's going to need to eat something. It's going to need to nurse. So if a woman has breasts, that's a good thing. If she doesn't have breasts at all, that's a bad thing, because the baby's going to need to eat. So, maybe the idea of bigger breasts, why is that attractive to so many guys? And again, there's always exceptions. It's not just a straight and clear cut. Some guys prefer smaller breasts. But the point is, why are the breasts just attractive? Why are they so attractive that the Bible literally has a proverb and says, let your wife's breasts satisfy you always? Maybe because God made them attractive to men, because it's a fertility marker. He wants that to be sexually attractive to men. So there's nothing wrong if men find it attractive. They're not perverts for finding it attractive. They're not perverts for wanting to look at them. Okay, there's nothing innately wrong with a man wanting to look at a woman's breasts. Or if a woman's trying to show them off and then guys just kind of just naturally look over. There's nothing intrinsically wrong with that. Okay? Especially if she's showing them off on purpose. Especially if she's trying to attract men's attention. Okay, it's stupid. It's like smelling delicious food and your mouth starts watering, and then telling somebody, "Oh, you're such a horrible person because your mouth started watering. How dare you? That's not your food." It's like, yeah, I know it's not my food, but the food smells amazing, and that's what naturally happens when I smell food. My mouth starts watering. I can't help it. Yes, you can. Just it's so frustrating. But yeah, so there's tons of things about the female form that are like the entire female form is supposed to be physically attractive to men. Okay, if it's a healthy form, healthy body, it's supposed to be attractive to men. Okay, so if that's the case, is there anything wrong innately with let's say it's a single woman? Because again, a married woman, she's already taken. She doesn't need to be trying to attract other men, because then she's by definition an adulteress. She's playing the part of an adulteress. Okay, what about a woman? Especially if her motivation is she just wants one, she's just looking for one guy. She's not trying to sleep around with a bunch of dudes. She just wants one guy. One husband. Why can't she just go around naked if she wanted to? Okay, I may not be able to give a full-fledged answer because, again, I want to keep this podcast a little bit short. I don't want to go 3-4 hours. But one thing I can say is, if you're a woman and you know what I've just explained, if you go, yeah, that makes sense. God designed my body to be physically attractive to men. And that's a good thing. And I really want my husband to be attracted to my body whenever I meet my husband. Since more than just your husband, more men than just your future husband are going to find your body attractive, and it's going to be such a, every dude's going to find your nude form attractive, or at least parts of your nude form attractive. I don't really see how showing off your body, walking around naked, is going to help you find a husband. Because if you're just looking for a guy, well then sure, do that. You'll find a guy. But if you're looking for a good quality, like a specific type of guy, then you're going to want more. You're going to want to attract that kind of a guy. Like you you don't want just a guy who finds your fertility markers attractive, because that's every guy. Okay, I don't think I'd be shocked if I met, well, I say there's always somebody. But if you take away the few exceptions, I'd be really shocked if I ever found a guy that said, I find breasts utterly repulsive. They're disgusting to me. Like, that'd be really weird. There'd be something mentally wrong with him. I'm not even a boob guy, but I would never say that I find women's breasts repulsive. So, in other words, I guess what I'm saying is the strategy, if you want to use that term, the strategy of I want to make myself as physically, sexually appealing to men and provocative to men to turn them on as a strategy of finding a husband, bad strategy. I don't think that's a good one at all. I think it's it's foolish. It's stupid. It's a stupid means of doing that. I think if you want a godly man, somebody who follows God, somebody who follows Jesus as his Lord, then you're going to want to do something or adorn yourself in something that would be attractive to only those kind of men. Because men who don't call Jesus their Lord, who want nothing to do with Jesus, who want nothing to do with God, are also going to find your breasts attractive. But if you can find men, if you can attract men who are definitely going to find your breasts attractive, but they're also going to find godliness, holiness, purity, chastity, if they're going to be attracted to all of that, okay, well, now you've at least gotten rid of all the people that are not going to call Jesus their Lord anytime soon. Okay, in other words, there are better strategies to employ, much better strategies. So flaunting all of your most sexually appealing fertility markers is just a bad strategy. I would say it's unwise at the very least. It's definitely sinful if you're already a married woman. I think it's definitely sinful if you're already a married woman, because now you're functioning as an adulteress. The other problem too is, well, there's so many problems, man. There's so many problems, and I'm trying to solve all of them at once, and it's not working. Um, there is the idea of being a harlot. Okay, a harlot's not necessarily an adulteress. Um, a harlot is, like a prostitute, a woman that is just, well, a prostitute's doing it for money. I think I could be wrong, but I think a harlot could be doing, basically being promiscuous, not necessarily for money, just being promiscuous. There are people out there, there are women out there that just want sex for the sake of sex. Um, you could say that a woman who is trying to flaunt all of her sex appeal is getting kind of close to like playing the harlot, at least having the heart of a harlot. Because again, if you're just using your sex appeal and that's it, that's all you're using. But then, of course, again, I could think of questions like, well, I'm not only doing that, but again, you're going to be attracting every type of guy. It's like, okay, well, what happens though? Like, let's say there's one dude who's kind of interested in me, or I've got a few guys. They're all godly guys. They're interested in me because I am a godly person. Can I show off some of my? Can I wear the revealing outfit? Can I wear the kind of like that looks a bit risque by some people's standards? Can I show off a little bit of my breast? Can I wear this tight fitting, outfit that shows my curves? In the past, I would just hands down, no. That's not good. I hesitate to just say no. It does, I will say, it does seem unwise to me still. Um, It does seem unwise to me, and maybe I'll be able to put my finger on it a little bit more in the future. Um, Part of it too is just because there's so many things about my perspective on the world. Like I'm not an egalitarian. I do not believe that men and women are on equal footing. Um, I believe that men are superior to women, and I believe that God designed them that way. This isn't a misogynistic take. This is just God designed men to be superior to women. Women are inferior to men. A baby is inferior to an adult. That doesn't mean that the baby lacks worth or is worth less. As two words, worth less than the adult, in terms of the eyes of God. Um, Being inferior is not like you're worth less. Okay, somebody who's stronger than me has superior strength to me. That doesn't mean that he's somehow like greater or better, in like a moral sense or an innate value, intrinsic worth. He is, it depends on what we're talking about. It depends on the context. In terms of being able to lift heavy things, yeah, he's worth more in terms of that, because nobody's equal. We all have different giftings. We all have different strengths. No pun intended. But I do believe in general, women are the weaker vessel. That's what the Bible says. And it's not talking about just physical strength. And there's other things there. Eve was taken from man, and it was Adam that named Eve. Okay, that's an authority. That's an authority marker. Is somebody, if you name something, then you're the one in authority over that person. Eve didn't name herself. Adam named her. Adam recognized who she was, that she was woman, for she was taken out of man, but he gave her the name Eve because she is the mother of all the living. So he was the superior, she was the inferior, and that was prior to the fall. So this isn't something that's like after the fall, now women are underneath men, and but in Christ we're all equal. That I need to do a podcast on that. I plan to, but so part of this is, again, I'm like, if we're looking at men and women are not on equal footing, that involves the approach to attracting a mate. This would be more like lions and antelopes. All right, if you're an antelope going out in front of all of the lions and flaunting yourself is bad. It's dangerous. Okay? You're not on equal footing to the lions. Discretion would be advisable. There's other things too. There's phrases, and I'm kind of pulling these out of context, so I'm hesitant even to do that. But there's phrases in like the Song of Songs that talk about not awakening love until it so desires. It seems wise to me that because of, this might be the best way, this might be the best conclusion I can come up with right now. It seems wise to me that if the end goal of sex, the primary goal of sex, is to be fruitful and multiply, to produce offspring, and if a close second is to facilitate a deep soul level bonding between a man and a woman, it seems wise to me to not be pushing for that prior to a covenant relationship with the person. In other words, you're kind of flirting the line. You're almost, jumping the gun, as it were, as a woman, to put yourself out there sexually, to arouse the sexual drives of men, to make them desire you, even if desiring you isn't sinful, because you're a single woman. You're not taken, you're not claimed by other men, or by another man, you don't have a husband. But that may not be good. That may not be good for them. There's also the fact that, I think of it too, just in a practical sense of like, if I'm starving and I really want to eat some food, and I've got people around me with delicious food that smells amazing that they've just cooked up, and they're putting it in front of me, and then but I'm not allowed to eat it. There's a sense in which that's kind of like torment. It's not helpful. What would be helpful is saying, hey, do you want some delicious food? I've got it, and you can have it. Just say the word. Man, I'm still struggling with this, because it's like, if you're doing this within the context of a marriage covenant, everything's fine, because it leads directly to everything that God wants from the sexual union. He wants the husband and wife to be bonded together. He wants the godly offspring that comes from that. But if you're doing those things which are sexually arousing outside of that, then there's no there's no there's no path forward. You're still hoping for a path forward. But at the same time, it's very important for guys to know that they're going to be physically attracted to their future spouse. Now, I don't have to see every single thing. I don't have to see, so again, I'm trying to draw some line, but it's tough to draw a line. Because some people go so far as to say, I don't think that, you should even be able to see the figure of, you end up with the extreme of like wearing a burqa. Just put a bag over your entire, put a tarp over your entire body. I don't care how much it restricts your function of being able to move around the world. Just wear this tarp, and that's it's we can't even the physical form, the hourglass figure. If I see any part of that, if I even see the curvature of your breasts even a little bit, that's too much of a turn on. That's wrong. That's not good either. It doesn't solve the problem. That's why it's wrong. And again, it makes it seem as if it does a lot of things. One, it makes it seem as if women are the only ones that have to do anything about this if it's a problem that needs to be solved. The other thing is, it also kind of makes it seem as if like the male sex drive is bad. Like it's men cannot ever be turned on sexually whatsoever for any reason by any woman that's not their wife. That's bad. So it doesn't. This gets into a whole other topic, which I'm gonna have to save for another podcast, where I delve into just maybe a little bit more of like sexuality, because I think that the Christendom, by and large, whatever flavor of it you want to come at it from, it'd probably be different to some degree. But we do not have a good grip, especially in American culture, on sexuality and on healthy sexuality. We have the people that push purity culture are doing it because they have a perverted view of sexuality. Maybe I could say this. I do think that there is a healthy level of sexual attraction that a man and a woman can have before they're married. Okay? I don't think that some sexual attraction between a man and a woman before marriage is bad. I don't think it's bad for a man to be deemed sexually appealing to a lot of women. In other words, more than just the one he's going to marry, or the one he's pursuing for marriage. I don't think that that's innately bad. I think part of this is the mindset that people have. It's almost like the mindset of, if the person in front of me is at all sexually appealing, if they're at all sexually arousing, that's therefore sinful. I think that's one of the problems with this. It goes back to the idea that like lust is bad. It's like, well, depends on how you define lust. If you're defining it correctly, it's not bad, not innately. The basic definition of lust in the original Greek is, the word being used just means to desire something strongly. Okay, that's used for like, hey, if you desire to be an elder or a deacon, and the word used there is lust. It's the same word. If you desire that, you desire a good thing. So you could say, like, if you lust to be an elder, then you lust for a good thing. You lust for an honorable thing. But you have to measure up to the characteristics of what an elder needs to be in order to qualify. Okay, Jesus lusted to go to the Passover, to share the Passover with his disciples. He desired it deeply and strongly. Okay, there's nothing wrong with that. But if I desire deeply and strongly a woman that's not mine, that's married to another man, that's not good. That's coveting. That's one of the 10 Commandments. Do not covet. Do not covet a neighbor's wife or your neighbor's donkey or your neighbor's stuff or anything that's your neighbor's. Okay, so there are things that are off limits that I should not desire strongly, period. And if I do, I'm crossing a line. I'm coveting. But if it's a woman that's if I see something in a store and I go, ooh, I really want that, well, then I want it strongly. Well, then I'll go buy it. There's nothing wrong with that. It's for sale. Okay, what about a woman who is not taken and she's in some sense for sale? She's on the market. Um, Hopefully, the guy that ends up marrying her strongly desires her, and that's why he married her. That'd be best case scenario, right? And best case scenario on her end, she strongly desires to be owned by him, to be his wife. I'm using that just to attack this egalitarian perspective of we're partners. Not biblically, you aren't. Biblically, the husband is the head and the woman is not. Biblically, the husband owns the woman. The woman does not own the man. And I can defend that, and I will in a future podcast. But this idea that lust is wrong, Jesus doesn't say that. He doesn't say if you look at a woman to lust after her, that's sinful. He's talking about married women. He's talking about married women. The word woman can mean wife as well. There's one word in Greek and it has to mean one or the other. And he's talking about adultery of the heart, which means desiring a woman that's already married. Okay, you don't commit adultery by desiring a woman that's not married. Okay, that's not adultery of the heart. That's not. If she's single, it's impossible to commit adultery with her. That's another video I'm going to have to make. I've already made a video, a rough draft where I've mentioned that, but in other words, to say that lust in and of itself is evil, you can't say that. You have to define your terms better. That'd be like saying desire is evil. Strong desire is evil. It's like, no. Desiring something that's evil is a bad desire. And it is possible to have a desire that is gluttonous or that's greedy. In other words, it's beyond what it should be. Those desires are bad. That's too strong of a desire, too much of a desire by definition. So there are some desires that are bad. But just to desire a woman as your spouse, as your wife, that's not innately evil. I'm talking about single women. They're not owned. They're not owned by another man. And so, in other words, if we define lust correctly, then we end up saying, okay, it's not innately evil for a man or a woman to look, well, okay, let's break it down. A man to look at another woman who is not taken. She's a virgin, let's say. She's single. She's unattached. And for him to strongly desire her. There's nothing wrong about that. There's nothing for him to... I mean, Jacob, when he saw Rachel, it mentions that he was attracted to her. He found her very attractive. She was beautiful in form and face. Okay, she wasn't wearing a burqa. He could see her form. And she was beautiful in form. I don't think that was sinful for him to go, ooh, she's got a nice figure. She's got a beautiful face. Her older sister, though, I don't like her eyes. She's got weak eyes, whatever that means. And I mean that legitimately, whatever that means. He didn't find her eyes attractive. But he found the face and the form of Rachel attractive. So I'm just pulling stuff out from my study of Scripture that I'm like, I just don't think that it's... I think that we have demonized sexual attraction, maybe because of the response to the hippie movement and free love and Hugh Hefner and whatever, and ubiquitous pornography, and like we've just made it to where it's like if you have any kind of a sexual component to your desire for your future spouse, that you're automatically sinful, you're lusting. It's like, no, I would hope that you would strongly desire the person that you end up marrying. And I would hope that there would be some kind of a sexual arousal to some degree. To some degree. I think that's natural. In the same way that if you walk past delicious food and you smell it, or you look at it and you see it and you go, ooh, man, I love fajitas, and man, they smell good. My mouth is watering. I really want some. Okay, that's good. It'd really suck if you looked over at fajitas and went, man, those don't look that good. They don't smell that good. Okay, that means they're a perfect candidate for what I need to eat for dinner tonight. But that's the way people treat it with the marriage stuff, and finding a future spouse, a husband or a wife. It's like, and so basically you end up pushing for both men and women to dress in such a way that they are not appealing whatsoever to the opposite sex. They're not appealing whatsoever. Like, men can't do anything to be even a little bit of a turn on to women, because if they do that, then they're not guarding her heart. Those are the terms that people throw out. Never mind that they're ripped out of context from other passages and have nothing to do with what people are saying. And so you end up with women, dressing in ways that aren't attractive at all to men, that, don't allow men to even see their form. Like Jacob wouldn't be able to look at Rachel, and all he'd be able to say is her face was pretty. I have no idea what she looks like, her form, because purity culture says you can't dress in a way that's attractive. So again, I think the passages that Paul and Peter are talking, where they're mentioning modesty, are dealing with status symbols and addressing that and saying there's something wrong with your heart here. I do think you can make judgment calls based on the way people dress. I'll throw some other things that I haven't mentioned yet, but I'm going to wrap up here. It seems it's very clear to me that you can make judgment calls on, like, for example, okay, real quick, because I have this pulled up. Proverbs 7:10. It says, "And behold, a woman comes to meet him, dressed as a harlot and cunning of heart." Okay, there's a context to that, but we don't even really need the context. All we need is, hey, here's a proverb that says there's a woman coming to meet a man, and she's dressed as a harlot? You mean there's a specific type of clothing? It doesn't mention the type of clothing, it just mentions that she's dressed as a harlot. Okay, that means harlots have a certain type of dress, clothing that they wear, something that they're indicating by the symbolic meaning of what they're wearing, that they're a harlot. You couldn't say that she's dressed as a harlot if there wasn't a certain type of way that harlots dressed. But it's interesting because it doesn't just say dressed as a harlot. It links it straight with and cunning of heart. So there's something wrong with her heart. She's cunning and she's dressed as a harlot. The clothing and the heart are linked there. They're right after each other. Okay, if you're a woman who's trying to seduce, maybe that ties back in. You're trying to seduce men, whether you're single or not. Again, obviously, if you're already married and you're trying to seduce men, you're an adulteress. But if you're a single woman and you're trying to seduce men, that's not good. Seduction is using your sexual, your sex appeal in a way that's manipulative to men. And vice versa. Men using their sex appeal to be sexually manipulative towards women. Okay, seduction is not good. By definition, it's it's evil. So if you're a woman who is dressing in such a way that is manipulating the sex drives of men, in some sense, against their will, because a lot of men don't want to be presented with that. Yeah, you run the risk of being seductive. You run the risk of not just being sexually appealing, but being seductive. And I really do believe, as many people in the comments section of this Facebook, group that I'm in, they're right. It's a heart issue. And again, the passages aren't talking about sexual provocation so much. That's not really what I don't even think that was in their minds, honestly. But I do think it is possible for women to dress in such a way to be sexually seductive. And I don't think that's right. Okay? We could say, you can try and draw the line. I think there's ways of being seductive that aren't wholly dependent on the clothing that you wear. It's the way you walk. It's the way you look at people. It's the way that you know, play with your hair or whatever. There's any number of ways of doing that, and just making a bunch of legalistic rules of, okay, you can't touch your hair in this way, you can't wear a dress that's like this, you can't do this, you can't. That's not going to solve it. The only people that are going to it's like banning guns. Okay, the only people that are going to follow that are going to be the law-abiding citizens, and all of the criminals have the guns. Okay, the women that are going to follow all of those rules are going to be the ones that were already trying to not be seductive in the first place. Okay, the seductive women are going to find a way to be seductive, no matter what legalistic set of rules you put in place. They'll find some way, because their heart's not right. So if you have a heart that doesn't want to seduce men, then maybe you're going to err more towards, you know what, I'm going to try and reduce the amount of sex appeal that I have. But not to complete zero, because I don't, but that's where you go to God and you go, God, I don't want to be manipulating and defrauding men. Yeah, I don't want to do that. I don't want to be porn. I don't want to do that. I also don't want to have men just view me merely as a sexual object or something that is just sexy. I want them to view me as a human being. So I don't want to distract from that either. How do I do that? And then let God guide you. Because He will, if that's your heart and that's your prayer. You may not even realize He's guiding you, but He's going to. And you're just going to, when you shop for clothes, you're going to be like, I don't know about this. That's maybe the best I can give at this point. I'll think more on it. Maybe I'll make a future podcast. I'm already a little over an hour and 15 minutes in. Those are my thoughts when it comes to the sexual stuff, sexual provocation with clothing. That's my position on the article. I think the article is all kind of, or the comment was smushing two things together that Christendom has smushed together for a long time that shouldn't be smushed together. And then the two passages he references, I think he's right. They don't have anything to do with that. Yeah. We'll end it there. I'm tired. Thanks for listening, and I hope that was helpful to somebody.